Hi, both. Thanks for joining us today on our Business Gurus channel, where we will be discussing key business topics to help students grasp the most important elements of their course in preparation for their exams and future career. Let's get started.
So here's a tough one for any business leader. When do you ditch your biggest dream, your main ambition, just to keep the lights on?
That's really the heart of what we're tackling today. We're doing a deep dive into changes in aims and objectives, specifically looking at how severe market conditions can force your hand.
Yeah, and for you listening, the key takeaway here, really, is that business goals, they're not carved in stone, not at all. They're reactive. The market itself often acts as this huge forcing function. It basically dictates terms sometimes, demanding companies adapt quickly, not just to compete, but honestly, sometimes just to survive. We really need to understand how that forced shift happens. Okay, let's start right there with that mechanism, this idea of necessary adaptation. Our sources highlight a fundamental point. Businesses, well, they have to be ready to pivot, sometimes drastically, when the world outside changes.
And there seem to be two main triggers for this, often working together. First, you've got big shifts in what customers actually want.
Customer preferences?
Think like DVDs to streaming or, taxis to ride sharing. If customer values change and your goals don't, well, you risk becoming irrelevant pretty fast.
Right.
And the second big signal, a major change in competition. Maybe a new player storms in with a totally different approach. Suddenly, your objective might shift from, say, expansion to just defending your turf.
And what's really striking is how quickly the stakes climb in those situations.
Yeah.
The focus shifts from, optimizing things, doing things a bit better, to basically triage. When those outside pressures really hit hard, the main goal often isn't maximizing profit anymore. It's about survival first.
Survival first.
Yeah, ensuring survival. And only then, maybe, trying to hold on to some kind of competitive edge in what might be a completely changed market. It's like the difference between trying to win a race and just, desperately trying to stay on the track.
That analogy really hits home because you see huge companies plan meticulously for the race, but maybe not enough for the potential crash, right?
Exactly.
So, to make this real, let's look at a high-stakes example. One where market conditions applied, maximum stress almost overnight. But let's unpack this. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about Primark during the start of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Ah, Primark. Yes, a huge, very successful global retailer. Before 2020, their main aim was pretty clear. Just relentless sales growth.
Their whole strategy was built on physical stores, low prices, high volume. And it worked incredibly well for years.
It really did.
But then the pandemic hit, and that created a market condition that just instantly shattered their model, the forcing condition, mandated closures of all their physical stores. Everywhere.
Globally.
Globally, this wasn't some gradual slump. It was an immediate, total operational shutdown. And here's the absolute killer detail, the thing that turned a massive problem into an existential threat. At that specific moment, Primark had zero online sales presence. None. Unbelievable almost for a retailer that size. Right. Their entire business model depended on people walking into stores. So they went from this booming global operation to literally overnight having absolutely no way to sell anything.
Zero sales channels open.
Imagine the panic in the boardroom. The sources must talk about how fast that pivot happened from the aim of growing sales to just covering costs. Was that like weeks of debate, or was it more like sheer panic over a few days?
Oh, it had to be immediate, instantaneous.
Yeah.
Because with no digital fallback, their primary strategic goal growth just vanished. Poof. When a retailer that big, geared entirely for growth, suddenly has no income, the objective has to flip instantly to just covering costs. And this is where you see how deep that change goes.
Okay, so covering costs sounds simple, but for a giant like Primark.
It's definitely not just about, asking for lower rent. It meant immediate, really drastic financial triage. Think about the knock-on effects. They had mountains of inventory. They couldn't sell huge write-downs there. Contracts with suppliers suddenly needed freezing or breaking. And critically, all those long-term, growth-focused projects, plans for new stores, big capital investments, maybe even R&D for the future, all that had to be shelved or canceled just to stop the bleeding.
Wow.
The new aim, survival, forced them to sacrifice future potential for immediate cash flow.
That level of sacrifice really underscores how brutally market conditions can redefine what success even means. But wait, connecting this back to what the sources say about strategic foresight. Primark's problem wasn't just the pandemic hitting, was it? It was also the fact they hadn't built an e-commerce arm years earlier. So was this massive shift to survival mode purely an unavoidable market shock, or was it partly a predictable outcome of maybe lagging behind on technology?
That's a crucial point. The pandemic was the trigger, yes, the acute event, but the underlying vulnerability, that lack of digital readiness that was the pre-existing condition, it really highlights how market conditions aren't always these huge, sudden global crises. Often they're the quieter creeping forces like technology shifts or slow changes in competition that you maybe didn't prepare for.
Right, things you ignore at your peril.
Exactly. And connecting this Primark example to the bigger picture, it's a powerful reminder that market conditions, while dramatic, are just one of several major forces that constantly pressure companies to change their aims. The pandemic caused a huge immediate shift for Primark, absolutely. But we need to remember the other factors. Our sources identify things that force changes in aims and objectives every single day, often less dramatically, but just as importantly.
Good point. Let's broaden out then, because most businesses are constantly tweaking their aims based on these other pressures long before hitting a crisis like Primark's. You mentioned technology. Let's start there.
Okay, technology.
Mm.
It's relentless, right? It forces changes even if your business is doing great right now. Imagine you run a successful consultancy focused on maximizing billable hours. That's your aim. But then, say, advanced AI comes along that can do 70% of your basic research instantly. Your objective has to shift. It can't just be about billable hours anymore. It has to become about integrating that AI. Exactly. Integrating the tech, maybe upskilling your people to use it effectively. Your goal shifts from pure labor efficiency towards maybe smart capital investment in software and retraining. It's a fundamental change in aim driven by tech.
Okay, that makes sense. What about legislation? That often feels like just red tape, but it can force a major strategic change, can it?
Oh, absolutely. It can be an instant strategic bombshell. Think about sudden, strict environmental regulations.
Right, like needing fully sustainable materials or banning a chemical you rely on.
Yeah. If you're, say, a manufacturing company whose main aim was minimizing production cost, that new law instantly forces a change. Your aim becomes massive investment in new processes, maybe overhauling your entire supply chain.
So the goal shifts from pure profit to compliance, risk management.
Precisely. Compliance, long-term risk management. And that often means delaying those ambitious expansion plans, sometimes for years, just to meet the new legal requirements.
Okay. Then there's performance. This seems obvious. If you're doing badly, you change things. But how does it shift the aim specifically?
Well, it seems intuitive, but the strategic implication is key. Let's say a company keeps missing its targets. Revenue goals missed quarter after quarter, market share slipping away. At that point, the original aim of, say, market domination starts to look, well, irresponsible, unrealistic.
Right. You can't aim for world domination if you can't even meet your quarterly numbers.
Exactly. So the objective has to shift immediately.
Yeah.
Maybe towards aggressive restructuring, focusing purely on getting the internal house in order, operational efficiency, or in really tough cases, the aim might become simply selling off parts of the business to stabilize things financially. Performance forces a shift from big ambition to necessary internal discipline.
Got it. And the last one the sources mention is internal reasons. This feels a bit different. How do internal shifts change external goals?
Yeah, this one's often overlooked. But think about a major leadership change. A new CEO comes in, or the board gets shaken up.
Okay.
That new leadership might just have a completely different philosophy, a different vision for the company. If the old aim was purely about short-term profits for shareholders,
The new team might say.
they might force a pivot. Maybe the new core aim becomes long-term sustainable growth, or perhaps a total revamp of the company's ethical standards, even if it requires costly changes to how things are done. It's an internal decision driving a fundamental change in the company's external strategic direction.
So it really all comes back to this need for flexibility, doesn't it? The Primark story is stark, a real cautionary tale.
It really is.
It shows even huge, successful companies can get knocked from growth right into survival mode instantly if they fall behind on things like technology or fail to anticipate legislative changes or just face a massive market shock. So the lesson isn't just about reacting when disaster strikes. It's maybe more about constantly testing your current goals against these potential pressures.
Constantly stress testing, yeah. Asking what if.
So for you listening, what's the bottom line? Objectives aren't fixed points on a map. They're fluid. They're shaped not just by your ambitions on paper, but by the immediate, sometimes harsh realities of the environment forcing your hand. Maybe the biggest challenge isn't setting a great goal, it's having the willingness and the organizational ability to ditch that goal in a heartbeat when the situation demands it.
Well said. And think about it. If a global pandemic forces a multi-billion-dollar company to abandon growth entirely for just covering costs, it really highlights how fragile business strategy can be. And that leads to maybe a final thought for you to mull over. If a huge shock like that forces such a drastic survival pivot, how often are businesses quietly being forced to rethink their survival metrics? Not because of a pandemic, but just because they're slowly falling behind the curve on technology compared to their competitors. That's a sobering thought.
The threat isn't always a sudden explosion. Sometimes it's just that slow, steady creep of innovation making your current aims, well, obsolete.
A fantastic point to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks to both of you for joining us today. You've been listening to the Business Gurus. Let's now hand it over to you. What further questions do you have based on what we've discussed so far? Leave a comment and we'll get back to you right away. If you haven't already, hit that follow for more business tips.